Hello everyone, so before this video starts, content warning, we'll talk about very heavy loaded subjects, especially sexual harassment and if any of this triggers a trauma or makes you way too uncomfortable, I'd advise you to skip that video entirely. I've been researching this subject sporadically since March of this year. I think you can understand one needs to take a good bunch of breaks when dealing with this kind of subject. Otherwise you kind of, break. So, as an abstract, most studies I dug out, there were like 20, but I only chose the most relevant ones in the sources, show the rate of women who were sexually harassed, stalked, raped or alike, usually at very high rates, especially compared to men. Notably, 81 to 97% of women were sexually harassed, dropping down to 43% for men. However, I have yet to see a single study on the number of said men assailants in the population. First off, why is it so hard to figure out? Well, for starters, sexual harassments barely ever get reported to cops. For sexual harassments, only 4 to 5% are ever estimated to be reported, according to YouGov, and for the estimation goes for most studies between 5 to 15%. Psychology-wise, men tend to not very reasonably acknowledge harassment. Notably, studies show that men estimate a level of sexual harassment against women slightly lower than reality and lower than women do quite consistently. Moreover, you'll see that the statistical analysis required to circumvent all of this, or at least the minimal amount, tends to result in quite the complicated mess. I'll still try to make my calculations intelligible, argue why I did them as such and their limitations, but I can't guarantee anything. And even after months of research, even sporadic research, but yeah, I'm still quite unsure of everything I said, so I might need to correct some of these calculations or maybe even make a new video entirely. But most fatally, it may not even be all that relevant. You know, when someone says men are trash, or something like, there's always some dude who's gonna say not all men. But what we usually tend to respond to that is, sure, not all men, but way too many. And no, that's not even a marginal response either. Here's all I got about it in a single week on fucking Twitter of all places. Some even mentioned that one man is just enough. Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, sure, any much is too much, but one dude obviously cannot create a global lack of trust against men. So let's get back to the original question then. How many men are sexual harassers? Well, despite all of the issues I mentioned, here are the statistics that I was able to come up with, and with as much argumentation as possible as well, so you can see my reasoning and hopefully come up with better statistics with more in-depth and rigorous analysis, hopefully. This video will only try to give an overall order of magnitude of the problem. To quote the findings in a 2003 study conducted by Barry Rosenfeld, Recidivism in Stalking and Obsessional Harassment, on a sample of 189 individuals with 147 men and 42 women, the victims of harassment were largely, although not exclusively, female, with 112 offenders only known to have harassed one woman and an additional 15 having harassed more than one different woman. 107 of these 127 offenders were male. Men were the victim of harassment in 18.8% of cases, so 35 of them, and in all but 2 of these cases there was only 1 victim. 16 of the offenders who harassed men were female. In 26 cases, both men and women were harassed by the same offender, and these offenders were largely male, 20 of them. The first thing we can do now is to plot a table counting the number of harassers in each column, according to the gender of the victim in each row, as follows. Well, there seems to be 1 harasser short, so I will say there were 146 men harassers, since that's what it seems to sum up to. Also, we have to take into account that these are only reported harassments. The only known to have harassed 1 woman part kind of implies that anyway, but it'll be relevant for later. In the same article, we find out that out of the 189 offenders, 93 of them actually reoffended, and out of them, 80% reoffended within the same year, which gives a rate of about 40% yearly reoffense. However, we know that out of the 81 to 97% of women who have been harassed, only 4% of them reported any such incident to an official organization. So there is a clear problem in how recidivism is counted here. In the UK, there are about 33.82 million women, and we could therefore expect about 1 million men to have been reported to authorities, which is about 3% or 1 in 33 men. However, that doesn't mean 75% of men are harassers. That would be a very basic mathematical mistake. In fact, since the average age in the UK is 40.5 years old, we could expect at least 0.08% of men who will harass at least 1 woman yearly and be reported for it. Since 40% of them reoffend, we could assume that out of these 40% reoffended at least twice, and out of these 40% reported at least thrice, etc., etc. And if we generalize this idea and go backwards as well, imagining that reported harassers make up 40% of all harassers, we'd find out that 0.2% of men would harass women yearly, or 1 man in 500. However, this measure does assume that anyone of any age below 40.5% is equally likely to harass a woman than, someone who is above 40.5 years old, which is questionable. A more relatable measure will therefore be to just use the 3.3 statistic, assuming that 3.3% only make up 40% of all harassers, which has its own problems, but well, what can we do? What it gives us is that about 8.25% of men would have harassed at least 1 woman in their life, which is about 1 in 12 men. The thing is, we can't know for sure which year a man will be most likely to offend, so honestly, I don't think we can do any better with very lenient measures as I used there, because honestly, I really doubt as much as 40% of harassers are reported, especially because they may be reported more easily once they have been so, at least once, but also because women can be very frequently harassed. In Manila, for example, about 60% of women admit they've ever been harassed once. And out of these 60%, a seventh of them also admit being harassed at least once a week. However, for the 40% statistic being probably much lower, I have no doubt actually arguing in this direction or otherwise. I just have reasonings, but induction is not reality. So I kind of have to stick with the 40% statistic. This would also mean that a man, on average, harasses 0.14. I think it's better to put it as such. If you have 7 men in a room, the expected number of victims overall sum up to 1 woman. Like, imagine you go 10 minutes at a Walmart or something, with usually about 300 people an hour. The expected number of victims of all men you've crossed there combined will be from 3 to 4 women. And this is just in 10 minutes. It will increase linearly the longer you stay. If you stayed, let's say, 100 minutes, the sum will increase to 34 women victims. So yeah, women do have good reasons to feel a bit fearful when there are men around. And if you think that isn't much, how? So anyway, to conclude, we can assume that about 1 in 12 men, so about 8% of all men, are sexual harassers, at least in the UK, but probably works globally as well. Or rather, sexually harassed at least 1 woman in their lifetime. And yearly, there's more than 0.2% of men who harass at least 1 woman, so about 1 man in 500, but it's still way too much. Now, as an addendum, one could wonder how to make harassment and especially recidivism decrease. For this, you can watch my video on rehabilitative justice, or rather the part that talks about it, since it's only like 25 minutes out of a almost 2 hours video. And that's probably one of the most source-dense thing I've ever fucking written. So hopefully you'll have all the material you need there in the sources. Still researching more about rehabilitative and restorative justice and the huge issue of recidivism in the carceral system is something I warmly recommend doing on your own. There's also the whole subject of normalizing more healthy behaviors. Kind of talks about normalization last time as well, but yeah. So, thanks for watching until the end, especially with such a subject. So yeah, anyway, see you all next time. Oh!